Saturday morning started like any other. I was out in the garage, fixing up some old shelves, and Sarah, my wife, was upstairs doing who knows what. We didn't have any plans for the day, no fancy dinners or hangouts with friends. Just a quiet weekend, the kind you look forward to after a long week. Everything felt calm, peaceful, too peaceful, maybe. Looking back, I should have known something was off. Then the doorbell rang, and before I could even set down my tools, I heard her rushing down the stairs, her footsteps almost frantic. That was the first sign something wasn't right. Sarah never hurried for anything, especially not for a package. Curious, I stayed where I was, wiping the dust from my hands. I could hear her muttering under her breath as she opened the door. I didn't think much of it at first. But when I glanced over and saw the size of the box, something in my gut twisted. It wasn't just the package itself, though, it was the look on her face. Her eyes widened like she'd just found some long-lost treasure. She clutched it close, almost like she was afraid to drop it. My curiosity grew, but I didn't say anything right away. I didn't want to come off as too nosy. Still, I wasn't an idiot. I knew something was off. She didn't bring the box into the living room like I expected. Instead, she carried it straight upstairs to our bedroom, holding it tight against her chest. It was strange, too strange to ignore. I felt that heavy, sinking feeling in my stomach and decided to follow her, quietly staying a few steps behind. When I reached the top of the stairs, I saw the door to our bedroom was cracked open just enough for me to peek through. Sarah was sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking as she tore into the box. What I saw inside stopped me cold. There, wrapped in white paper, were the ashes of her wedding dress. The dress she wore 6 years ago. The one she told me was the most important piece of her life. I froze. What the hell was she doing? And why now? She hadn't mentioned a thing about this, hadn't asked if it was something we should do together. Hell, she hadn't even hinted at it. She gently traced her fingers along the glass jar that held the ashes, a look on her face I didn't recognize. And then she smiled. Not a soft, sentimental smile, the kind you'd expect from someone reflecting on memories. No, this was something else. This was relief. Pure, unmistakable relief, like some kind of weight had been lifted off her shoulders. I wasn't about to let this slide. Sarah, I said, pushing the door open wide enough for her to see me standing there. She jumped, nearly knocking the jar off the bed. Her face paled for a split second before she masked it with that fake calm she always used when she thought she had control. Oh, she said, casually trying to push the jar behind her. It's nothing. Just an old keepsake. A keepsake? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You cremated your wedding dress without even telling me. She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms like I was the one overreacting. Why do you care, Ryan? It's just a dress. It doesn't mean anything now. That hit me harder than I expected. Didn't mean anything. That dress was the symbol of everything we'd been through, the start of our life together. And she just burned it like it was a piece of trash. I don't get it, Sarah, I said, my voice strained. Why would you do this? But all I got from her was a shrug and a cold, detached expression. It was like she was done pretending to care. She turned away from me, grabbing her purse from the chair as if the conversation was over. I'm going out, she said without even looking back, her voice casual, like she hadn't just shattered my world. The door slammed behind her, the sound echoing through the house, sharp and final. I stood there, staring at the jar of ashes, feeling something crack inside me. How had we gotten here? How had something that once felt so solid, so permanent, turned into this? I stood there in the silence for what felt like hours, my mind racing. She had just left, like none of it mattered. Like burning the symbol of our marriage was nothing more than tossing out old junk. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the final straw, that something deeper was going on. But the truth was, I'd been sensing this for a while. The late nights, the unexplained absences, and the way she always seemed distant. I just didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to face the fact that my marriage was crumbling right in front of me. I decided to do something I hadn't done in a long time. I picked up her phone. I knew it was wrong, invading her privacy like that, but at this point, I needed answers. She had been secretive lately, always keeping her phone close, even bringing it into the bathroom when she showered. And that wasn't like her. I unlocked it. She hadn't changed her passcode, which, honestly, surprised me. I braced myself, not sure what I was even looking for, but knowing I would find something. I scrolled through her messages first, but nothing stood out. Just the usual chats with friends, coworkers, and some family. I almost put the phone down, telling myself I was overreacting, that maybe this was all in my head. But then I opened her email. And there it was. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Mike. I knew who he was. A colleague. Someone she'd mentioned casually in passing over the last few months. He wasn't some stranger, not some random guy. No, Mike had been in the background of our lives this whole time, slowly slipping in without me even realizing it. The emails weren't sexual, not outright. They were worse. They were emotional. Long conversations about life, about frustrations, about how trapped she felt in our marriage. I skimmed through them, my hands shaking, heart pounding harder with every word. She told him things she hadn't told me in years. How she felt suffocated. How she wished she could just break free from the monotony. How she was rediscovering herself with him. And Mike? He was eating it up. His replies were full of sympathy, understanding, and just enough flirtation to make it clear where this was headed. I felt sick. This wasn't just some office fling, it was deeper than that. She was confiding in him in ways she hadn't done with me in years. I tossed the phone down, pacing the room, feeling the walls close in. How had I missed this? How had I let it get to this point? Part of me wanted to storm out of the house, find her wherever she was, and confront her right there, demand answers. But another part of me knew it wouldn't matter. She was already gone, emotionally, at least. The Sarah I married was slipping away, and this Mike guy was the one pulling her. I couldn't just stand there, stewing in my anger and disbelief. I needed to do something. So I grabbed my Ryanette and keys, and without thinking, I headed out the door. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get out of that house. The house that no longer felt like home. The house that had become a graveyard for my marriage. I drove around aimlessly for what felt like hours, my mind racing, playing out every scenario in my head. What would I say to her? How would I confront her? Would she admit it? Would she lie? I wanted to scream, to hit something, but all I could do was grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a bar I hadn't been to in years. It was one of those dive bars, dark, quiet, the kind of place you go to when you don't want to be seen. I sat at the counter, nursing a beer, staring blankly at the TV. I wasn't really watching the game playing on the screen, but it was better than thinking about what was waiting for me back at home. A part of me wondered if she even noticed I was gone. Probably not. She was too wrapped up in her secret world with Mike to care. I could practically picture her now, texting him, telling him how much she needed him, how much I didn't understand her. It was all so predictable, so cliché, but that didn't make it hurt any less. After a while, I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen, contemplating whether or not I should text her. Tell her I knew. Tell her I wasn't some fool who didn't see what was going on. But as my thumb hovered over the keyboard, I realized something: it wouldn't change anything. No matter what I said, no matter how angry I got, it wouldn't bring us back. We were already too far gone. So I sat there, alone at the bar, the realization sinking in deeper with every passing minute. I don't remember how long I stayed at the bar that night. I just sat there, lost in my thoughts, drinking in the numbness that came with each beer. Eventually, I dragged myself back to the house, but by the time I got home, Sarah was already asleep. Or maybe she was pretending to be. I didn't care enough to find out. The next morning was no different than any other. She acted like nothing was wrong, like we hadn't just silently blown our marriage to pieces. I watched her from across the kitchen as she made coffee, humming to herself, scrolling through her phone. Probably texting Mike. The thought of it made my stomach turn. I wanted to say something, to confront her right there and rip this facade to shreds. But instead, I stayed quiet, waiting for her to crack. And then she did. "Are you just going to keep sulking around?" she asked suddenly, not even looking up from her phone. Her tone was sharp, irritated, like I was some kind of burden for being upset. I couldn't believe her. Sulking? That's how she saw it. "You want to talk about sulking?" I asked, my voice low, barely holding back my frustration. "You've been lying to me for months, and I'm supposed to act like everything's fine." She finally looked up, her eyes narrowing. "I haven't lied about anything." I almost laughed at how bold she was, at how easily the lie slipped out of her mouth. "You're seriously going to stand there and deny it?" "I know about Mike, Sarah. I've seen the emails." For a split second, her face faltered. There was a flash of panic in her eyes before she masked it with indifference. "So you went through my stuff," she shot back, deflecting like she always did. "Real mature, Ryan." I couldn't take it anymore. "Don't turn this around on me," I snapped, stepping closer. "I went through your phone because you've been acting shady for months. And now I know why." She crossed her arms, her eyes cold and calculating. "You know nothing," she said, her voice like ice. "Mike is just a friend. We've talked, sure, but it's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. "You've been confiding in him, telling him things you haven't told me. You've been emotionally cheating on me, Sarah, and you know it." Her expression didn't change. She didn't flinch, didn't apologize. Instead, she shrugged. "If I can't talk to you, then I have to talk to someone, don't I?" That hit harder than anything. The coldness, the way she just brushed it off like it was nothing, like I was the problem. "So that's it, then?" I asked, my voice trembling with frustration. "You've just given up on us?" She sighed, like she was already bored with the conversation. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is, Ryan. I haven't given up on anything. I just needed someone to talk to. Mike understands me." That was the final nail in the coffin. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. She was done with me, done with us. And honestly, I realized I was done too. I stood there for a moment, staring at her, trying to figure out how we had gotten here. How the woman I married, the woman I had loved for so long, had turned into this cold, indifferent stranger standing in front of me. But I didn't recognize her anymore. She wasn't the person I thought she was. "You're right," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the anger boiling inside me. "I am making this a bigger deal than it is. Because this is a big deal, Sarah. And if you can't see that, then maybe we've been done for a lot longer than I thought." She didn't respond. She just stared at me, her face blank, emotionless, like none of this mattered. And maybe to her, it didn't. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to be around her anymore. I needed space. I needed to clear my head. Grabbing my keys, I headed out the door, not knowing where I was going but knowing I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I drove around aimlessly for hours, just like I had done the night before. My mind was racing, but at the same time, I felt numb. The reality of it all was starting to sink in. Sarah didn't care. She had checked out of our marriage long before I had realized it, and there was no bringing her back. Eventually, I found myself parked outside a park we used to go to when we first started dating. Back when things were simpler. Back when we were happy. I sat there, staring out at the playground where we used to sit and talk for hours, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. But the truth was, I already knew. We had let our relationship fall apart piece by piece, day by day, until there was nothing left but resentment and indifference. And now, it was too late to fix any of it. For the first time in a long time, I let myself feel the weight of it all. The anger, the betrayal, the sadness, it all came crashing down on me, and I realized that I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep holding on to something that was already dead. I stayed at the park for a long time, watching the sky change from a soft blue to the deep orange of sunset. The longer I sat there, the clearer it became, I wasn't going to get back the life I thought I had with Sarah. She'd checked out long ago, and I had been too blind, too hopeful, to see it. When I finally drove back home, the house was dark and quiet. I expected Sarah to be gone, off with Mike or whoever she was using to fill the void I apparently couldn't. But when I walked inside, I found her sitting in the living room, legs curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at her. Part of me wanted to say something, to confront her one last time, to demand she admit everything. But the other part of me, the part that had been worn down by months of silence and emotional exhaustion, was tired. Tired of the lies. Tired of pretending. Tired of fighting for something that was already gone. "Hey," she said without looking up, like nothing had changed. Her voice was calm, detached, like she wasn't sitting in the middle of our broken marriage. I didn't respond. I just walked past her, heading for the stairs, ready to lock myself in the guest room for the night and shut out whatever remained of the mess we had created. But as I reached the bottom of the staircase, something in me snapped. "I'm done, Sarah." My voice came out quieter than I expected, but it was steady. Firm. She looked up from her phone, her expression bored, like she couldn't be bothered to take me seriously. "What's that supposed to mean?" I turned to face her, and for the first time in months, I felt completely clear-headed. "It means I'm done with this. With us. With whatever this thing is that we've been pretending is a marriage." She didn't flinch, didn't show any emotion. She just raised an eyebrow, like I was being dramatic. "You're overreacting," she said, her tone flat and dismissive. "We've had rough patches before. This is just another one." I almost laughed at how easily she brushed it off. Rough patch? That's what she thought this was. "This isn't a rough patch, Sarah," I said, my voice shaking slightly with frustration. "This is you emotionally checking out of our marriage months ago. This is you lying to me, sneaking around with Mike, and acting like none of it matters." She sighed, rolling her eyes like she was already tired of the conversation. "I've told you 100 times, nothing is going on with Mike. You're just paranoid." I shook my head, unable to believe she was still sticking to that lie. "I've seen the emails," I reminded her, my voice low and steady. "I know you've been confiding in him, telling him things you haven't told me in years. You're having an emotional affair, and you know it." She stood up, crossing her arms and glaring at me, her posture defensive. "I don't owe you anything, Ryan," she snapped, her voice cold. "I can talk to whoever I want. If you can't handle that, then that's your problem." There it was. The truth. She didn't care. She didn't care about me, about us, about the life we had built together. I was just an inconvenience in her new life, something to be brushed aside so she could focus on whatever made her feel alive again. I felt something inside me harden. I was done begging for answers, done waiting for her to show some sign that she still cared. I had been holding on to the past for too long, hoping that the woman I fell in love with was still somewhere inside her. But she was gone. And there was no getting her back. You're right, I said quietly, my voice almost a whisper. You don't owe me anything. But I don't owe you anything either. She stared at me, her expression unreadable, but I could see the slightest flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. I'm filing for divorce, I said, the words coming out steadier than I thought they would. I can't keep living like this, and I'm not going to fight for someone who doesn't care whether I'm in their life or not. Her face stayed neutral, but there was a flicker of something, maybe shock, maybe anger, that flashed across her eyes. Divorce, she repeated, her voice quieter now, like she hadn't expected me to actually take that step. Are you serious? As serious as you were when you decided to destroy our marriage, I shot back, my voice rising. You want out. You want to be free. Fine. You can have it. You're free, Sarah. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, staring at me, like she was waiting for me to take it back. To back down, like I had done so many times before. But I wasn't backing down this time. I was done. Without another word, I turned and walked up the stairs, leaving her standing in the living room, alone. The next few days were a blur. I called a lawyer, set up a meeting, and started putting things in motion. Sarah barely spoke to me after that night. She stayed out late more often, sometimes not even bothering to come home until the morning. It didn't matter anymore. She was doing what she wanted, and I was letting her go. I thought the day I filed the divorce papers would be hard. That I'd feel some kind of grief or regret, like I was officially closing the door on the life we had built. But I didn't. If anything, I felt relief. I felt free. Sarah didn't even put up a fight. She signed the papers without hesitation, barely reading them over before handing them back to me. I guess she had wanted this just as much as I did, maybe even more. And just like that, it was done. After months of emotional chaos, after years of drifting apart, our marriage was over. And I was okay with that. I had finally accepted that the Sarah I once knew was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone I didn't want to know anymore. The day after the divorce papers were signed, Sarah packed up her things and left. There was no tearful goodbye, no dramatic confrontation. She didn't even tell me when she was going, just slipped out of the house with her suitcases, leaving behind only the memories of what once was. I heard the door close softly, and just like that, she was gone. Standing in the empty house, I thought I'd feel something, sadness, regret, anger. But all I felt was relief. The kind of relief that comes and you've been holding your breath for too long and finally let it out. It was over. The fights, the lies, the tension that had been suffocating me for months, it was all done. The next few weeks passed in a strange blur of calm. I got used to the silence. The house, once full of the constant hum of tension and unsaid words, felt peaceful. I no longer had to tiptoe around Sarah's moods or wonder where she was or what she was doing. For the first time in what felt like years, I had space to breathe. I started focusing on things I hadn't had time for during the mess of the last year. Little things, like cleaning out the garage or fixing the squeaky kitchen door that had been bothering me for months. I spent my weekends reconnecting with old friends, people I had pushed aside while I was too wrapped up in trying to save my marriage. They welcomed me back like no time had passed, and for that, I was grateful. Slowly, I started piecing my life back together, bit by bit. Of course, there were moments when it hit me, those quiet moments late at night when I'd roll over in bed and realize the space next to me was empty. But even then, I didn't feel sad. I felt free. The woman I'd loved, the one I had built my life around, was gone long before we signed those papers. Letting her go was just the final step in accepting that truth. One afternoon, I decided to do something I hadn't done in months. I went through my phone and deleted all of the messages, photos, and emails connected to Sarah. I wasn't holding on to them for sentimental reasons, but they were still there, haunting me, like some kind of emotional clutter I hadn't had the energy to clean out. But now, I was ready. I scrolled through each file, each reminder of the life we'd shared, and with every swipe, I felt lighter. By the time I was done, it felt like I had cleared out not just my phone, but my mind. I didn't need those memories anymore. I didn't need the weight of the past dragging me down. A few months later, I found myself back at the park, the one where Sarah and I used to spend hours talking back when we first started dating. The same park I'd gone to the day I realized we were done. But this time, it felt different. The memories of us were still there, of course, but they didn't hurt anymore. They were just memories, pieces of the past that had shaped me, but didn't define me. I sat on a bench, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting the park in a soft, golden light. It was peaceful, quiet, just like it had been back then. But this time, I wasn't thinking about her. I was thinking about the future, about what came next. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't haunted by what had gone wrong. I wasn't looking back, wondering how I could have fixed things. I was looking ahead, to whatever came next. I had let go of the anger, the frustration, the hurt. I wasn't bitter anymore. In a strange way, I was even grateful. Sarah had pushed me to my breaking point, but in doing so, she had forced me to rebuild. I had lost her, yes, but I had found myself again. And that was worth more than anything we'd had together. As the sky grew darker and the stars began to appear, I stood up and started walking. I didn't know exactly where I was headed, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that I was moving forward. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't stuck in the past. I wasn't waiting for someone else to decide my fate. I was in control now. And for the first time in what felt like forever, that was enough.